I stood in my driveway staring at what used to be my carefully cultivated vegetable garden, and all I could see was a flat expanse of freshly poured concrete. 6 years of work of building up the soil, of nurturing heirloom tomato plants and pepper varieties I had collected from across the country, all entombed under about 4 inches of gray cement. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to take pictures, my mind racing to understand how this could have possibly happened while I was away for a 3-day conference in Chicago. My name is Trevor Raines, and I had bought this house in Meadowbrook Heights, a planned community in Scottsdale, Arizona, exactly 7 years ago. Back then the HOA seemed reasonable enough. The covenants were strict but not insane, and the neighborhood looked pristine. I was a software engineer working remotely, which gave me plenty of time to indulge in my passion for gardening. The Arizona heat was challenging, but I had spent years learning how to work with it. Installing shade cloth, building raised beds with the proper soil mix, and creating a thriving oasis in my backyard. The garden beds in question were in my side yard, clearly visible from the street but entirely on my property. I had 6 large raised beds, each 4 feet by 8 feet, constructed from cedar wood that I had sealed and maintained meticulously. They were filled with a custom soil blend that had taken me 2 years to perfect, and they produced an abundance of vegetables year-round. I shared my harvest with neighbors, donated to the local food bank, and had even been featured in a local gardening magazine last spring. Then Brenda Whitmore became HOA president. Brenda was 52 years old, recently divorced, and had apparently decided that micromanaging the neighborhood was her new purpose in life. She had moved into Meadowbrook Heights about 18 months ago, immediately joined the HOA board, and within 6 months had maneuvered herself into the presidency after the previous president retired and moved to Florida, where our old president, gentle Mr. Patterson, had been reasonable and focused on actual community improvement. Brenda seemed obsessed with enforcing every tiny rule and inventing new ones. The trouble started about 4 months ago. I came home from the grocery store to find a violation notice taped to my front door. The notice claimed that my garden beds were not in compliance with the HOA's aesthetic standards and that the vegetable plants were considered unsightly agricultural activity prohibited in residential areas. I was stunned. These beds had been here for 6 years without a single complaint. I had approval from the Architectural Review Committee when I first installed them. I immediately requested a hearing with the HOA board, which was my right under the covenants. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in the community clubhouse. I showed up with a binder full of documentation, my original approval from 2019, photographs showing how well maintained the garden was, letters from neighbors expressing their support, and even a copy of the Arizona Community Garden Act, which protected homeowners' rights to grow food on their own property. Brenda sat at the head table with 2 other board members, Peggy Thornton and Marcus Webb. Peggy seemed nervous and uncomfortable, constantly fidgeting with her papers. Marcus looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Brenda, however, had this tight smile that made my skin crawl. Her blonde hair was cut in that aggressive angled bob that seemed to be the official hairstyle of angry HOA presidents everywhere, and she wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Mr. Raines," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we appreciate you taking the time to appear before the board. However, I'm afraid your documentation is outdated. The board has updated the community standards, and vegetable gardens visible from the street are no longer permitted." "When was this update made?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I never received any notice of changed covenants." "The board has the authority to interpret and enforce standards as we see fit," Brenda replied, not actually answering my question. "The original covenants state that all landscaping must maintain the aesthetic harmony of the community. Your garden beds, while I'm sure they're very productive, do not meet that standard." "They've been here for 6 years without issue," I pointed out, "and I have letters from 12 neighbors saying they have no problem with them. In fact, most of them appreciate the fresh vegetables I share." Brenda's smile tightened. "The board has made its decision. You have 30 days to remove the garden beds and restore the area to appropriate desert landscaping. If you fail to comply, the board will take action." "What kind of action?" I asked. "We will exercise our right to enter your property and remediate the violation at your expense," she said. "It's all in the covenants you signed when you purchased your home." I left that meeting furious but determined to fight this properly. I consulted with a real estate attorney named Diana Sheffield who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed my case and told me I had strong grounds to fight this, especially given the Arizona statutes protecting food gardens. She drafted a formal response to the HOA, citing the relevant laws and demanding that they rescind the violation notice. The HOA's response was to fine me $500 for non-compliance and to start daily fines of $50 until I removed the beds. Diana filed for an injunction in Maricopa County Superior Court to stop the fines and prevent the HOA from taking any action against my property. We had a hearing scheduled for 6 weeks out, which was frustratingly far away, but apparently standard for the court's calendar. In the meantime, I continued to maintain my garden and document everything. I installed security cameras covering the side yard where the beds were located, just in case. I posted about the situation in the Meadowbrook Heights Community Facebook group, and I was heartened by the response. Most of my neighbors were supportive, sharing their own stories of Brenda's increasingly aggressive enforcement actions. Several people mentioned that she seemed to have personal vendettas against certain homeowners, always finding violations on their properties while ignoring identical issues at homes owned by her friends. One neighbor, an elderly man named George Hendricks, who lived 3 houses down, told me that Brenda had fined him $2,000 for having a small decorative fountain in his front yard that she claimed violated noise ordinances, even though the fountain was nearly silent and had been there for 10 years. Another neighbor, Sarah Chen, said Brenda had threatened her with violations because her teenage son's car was parked in the driveway overnight, claiming that only vehicles parked in garages were acceptable. Despite the covenants saying nothing of the sort, it became clear that Brenda was running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, and most people were too intimidated or exhausted to fight back. But I had been documenting everything, and I had a good attorney. I felt confident we would prevail in court. Then I had to go to Chicago for a conference. I was scheduled to speak on a panel about sustainable software development practices, and it was important for my career. I would be gone from Tuesday morning until Thursday evening, just under 3 full days. Before I left, I checked my security cameras to make sure they were working properly and backed up to the cloud. I had a bad feeling, though I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid. I should have trusted my instincts. The conference went well. My panel was on Wednesday afternoon, and it was well received. I spent Wednesday evening having dinner with colleagues, and I flew back Thursday morning, landing at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport around 2 in the afternoon. I collected my luggage, got my car from the economy lot, and drove the 30 minutes back to Meadowbrook Heights. As I turned onto my street, I immediately noticed something was wrong. There was a concrete truck parked 2 houses down from mine, and several workers were cleaning equipment. My stomach dropped as I pulled into my driveway and saw the side yard. The garden beds were gone. All 6 of them, along with every plant, every carefully cultivated tomato, every pepper, every herb. In their place was a smooth expanse of fresh concrete, still slightly damp, covering an area of approximately 300 square feet. The concrete had been poured right over everything, burying years of work and hundreds of plants under inches of cement. I sat in my car for a full minute, unable to process what I was seeing. Then the rage hit, hot and immediate. I got out and walked over to the concrete, careful not to step on it since it was still curing. The workers were loading equipment into a truck. "Who authorized this?" I demanded, walking up to them. The workers looked at each other nervously. One of them, a middle-aged Hispanic man wearing a concrete company shirt that said, "Desert Stone Concrete," shrugged. "We just pour where we're told to pour, man." "The HOA lady hired us, Brenda Whitmore?" "Yeah, that's her. She said the homeowner wanted it done and to bill it to the HOA account." "I'm the homeowner," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I never authorized this. You poured concrete over 6 garden beds full of plants." The man's eyes widened. "Oh, damn." She said it was just some old wooden boxes and weeds that needed to be removed. "We got here yesterday afternoon, and she supervised the whole thing. Had us rip out the boxes and pour right over the area." "Did you get a permit for this work?" The workers exchanged glances again. The HOA lady said she had all the permits. "We just did the work." I pulled out my phone and immediately called Diana, my attorney. It went to voicemail, so I left a detailed message about what had happened and sent her several photos. Then I called the Scottsdale Police Department's non-emergency number. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. I explained the situation, showed them the security camera footage from my phone, which clearly showed Brenda arriving with the concrete crew on Wednesday morning, directing them to destroy my garden beds and supervising as they poured concrete over my property. The footage was damning. You could clearly see her pointing at the beds, watching as the workers dismantled them, and nodding in approval as the concrete was poured. The officers took a report and gave me a case number. One of them, Officer Martinez, looked at the concrete and shook his head. "This is definitely property destruction, but since it's tied up with the HOA, you'll probably need to handle it through civil court. We'll file the report, but the county attorney probably won't pursue criminal charges unless your lawyer thinks it's necessary." "She destroyed thousands of dollars worth of plants and improvements," I said, "not to mention the soil amendments and the beds themselves." "Document everything," Officer Martinez advised. "Get quotes for restoration. This is definitely going to be a lawsuit situation." After the police left, I spent the next 2 hours documenting everything. I took hundreds of photos from every angle. I measured the concrete area precisely. I reviewed all my security footage and made backup copies. I also started an itemized list of everything that had been destroyed. The 6 cedar raised beds, the custom soil blend, 43 tomato plants of various heirloom varieties, 18 pepper plants, 12 cucumber plants, various herbs including basil, cilantro, and oregano, and numerous other vegetables. I also noted the irrigation system that had been buried under the concrete, including the timer, valves, and drip lines. Deanna called me back around 6 that evening. I filled her in on everything, and I could hear the anger in her voice. "This is bad, Trevor, really bad." She had no legal authority to do this, especially with a pending court case. "This is destruction of property, contempt of court since she took action while an injunction was pending, and possibly trespassing. I'm going to file an emergency motion first thing tomorrow morning." "What about criminal charges?" I asked. "I think we should pursue them," Diana said. "This goes beyond a civil dispute. She deliberately destroyed your property. Let me make some calls. In the meantime, don't touch the concrete. We might need to bring in experts to document the damage underneath." That night, I barely slept. I kept going over the security footage, watching Brenda direct the destruction of my garden. Her face showed no remorse, only satisfaction. At one point in the video, she actually smiled while watching the concrete being poured. This wasn't just about enforcing HOA rules. This was personal. Friday morning, Diana filed multiple motions in court. She requested an emergency hearing, asked for compensatory and punitive damages, and filed a police report supplement requesting criminal charges for destruction of property, criminal trespassing, and abuse of HOA authority. She also sent a formal demand letter to Brenda personally and to the HOA board, notifying them that all actions against my property must cease immediately and that we would be seeking full restitution. By Friday afternoon, the story had exploded in the neighborhood. Everyone was talking about what Brenda had done. The community Facebook group was on fire with comments, most of them condemning Brenda's actions. Several people posted their own photos of my garden beds before and after. Someone started a petition to remove Brenda from the HOA board, and it got over 100 signatures within hours. Brenda responded by posting on the Facebook group that she had acted within her authority as HOA president to remediate a code violation and that I had been given fair warning. She claimed the HOA would bill me for the concrete work, which had cost the association $7,000. That post was a mistake on her part. It was a written admission that she had authorized the destruction of my property. Diana immediately saved screenshots of everything. On Monday, we had our emergency hearing. Judge Patricia Drummond presided, a stern woman in her early 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. Diana presented our case, showing photos of the garden beds before and after, the security footage of Brenda directing the concrete pour, and documentation of all my previous attempts to resolve the issue properly through legal channels. The HOA's attorney, a nervous young man named Kyle Morrison who looked like he had just graduated from law school, tried to argue that the HOA had acted within its authority. Judge Drummond cut him off. "Counselor, your client poured concrete over the plaintiff's property while a court case was pending. How exactly is that appropriate?" "Your Honor, the HOA covenants give the board authority to remediate violations," Kyle stammered. "Not while I have a pending case on this exact issue," Judge Drummond said sharply. "Mrs. Sheffield, what are you seeking?" Diana stood. "Your Honor, we're seeking an immediate injunction preventing the HOA from taking any further action against Mr. Raines's property. We're also seeking a court order requiring the HOA to restore the property to its previous condition at their expense." Additionally, we're seeking compensatory damages for the destroyed plants, equipment, and improvements, as well as punitive damages for the willful nature of this destruction. The punitive damages seem appropriate given the circumstances, Judge Drummond said. I'm granting the injunction effective immediately. As for restoration, I'm ordering the HOA to provide Mr. Raines with funds to restore his property within 14 days. We'll schedule a hearing to determine the exact amount after both parties have had time to bring in experts to assess the damages. Is that clear, Mr. Morrison? Yes, Your Honor, Kyle said weakly. I want to be very clear about something. Judge Drummond continued, looking directly at Kyle. If your client takes any further action against Mr. Raines or his property, she will be held in contempt of court. Make sure Ms. Whitmore understands that. After the hearing, Diana and I stood outside the courthouse. That went well, she said. But now comes the hard part. We need to document the full extent of damages. I'm going to recommend we bring in several experts, a landscaping contractor to assess the cost of removing the concrete and rebuilding the beds, a horticulturist to document the value of the destroyed plants, and a soil specialist to evaluate what it will take to restore your custom soil blend. How much do you think this will cost her? I asked. Based on what you've told me, probably $30,000 to $40,000 minimum for actual damages, Diana said. But with punitive damages and legal fees, we could be looking at significantly more. She made a very expensive mistake. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with the experts Diana recommended. First came Carlos Mendez, a landscaping contractor who specialized in high-end residential projects. He took measurements, examined the concrete, and prepared a detailed estimate for removal and restoration. His assessment was that the concrete removal alone would cost approximately $6,000 because it had to be done carefully to avoid damaging the underlying soil structure and the property's drainage system. Rebuilding 6 raised beds with cedar wood of the quality I had used would cost another $4,000, including labor. Next was Dr. Helen Nakamura, a horticulturist from the University of Arizona who specialized in urban agriculture. She reviewed my detailed records of what plants I had been growing, including photographs I had taken regularly for my gardening journal. She estimated the value of the mature plants at the time of destruction to be approximately $8,000, considering that many of them were rare heirloom varieties that I had spent years cultivating and selecting for Arizona's climate. She noted that several of my tomato plants were 4th-generation selections that I had personally bred for heat tolerance, making them particularly valuable. The soil specialist, Thomas Brennan, was perhaps the most thorough. He took core samples from areas of my yard that had the same soil amendments I had used in the garden beds, analyzed them, and prepared a report on what it would take to recreate the soil blend. His estimate for replacing the custom soil in all 6 beds was $7,000, including the cost of the various organic amendments, minerals, and beneficial microorganisms that I had added over the years. There were also other costs. The irrigation system that had been destroyed was worth about $2,000 in parts and labor to reinstall. I had to rent equipment to remove the concrete since we couldn't wait for the HOA to do it. That cost me $3,000, which Diana said we would add to the damages. I also documented my lost productivity, since I would have to rebuild everything from scratch and would lose at least 2 full growing seasons getting the soil biology back to where it had been. When all the expert reports were compiled, the total came to approximately $38,000 in direct damages. Diana recommended we seek that amount plus an additional $10,000 in punitive damages, attorney's fees of around $5,000, and court costs. During this time, Brenda was not quiet. She continued to post on the neighborhood Facebook group, claiming that I was trying to extort money from the HOA and that she had only been doing her job. She organized a special HOA meeting to discuss the lawsuit and tried to pass a special assessment on all homeowners to pay for the legal defense. That meeting did not go well for her. I attended, along with about 40 other homeowners. Brenda tried to control the meeting, but person after person stood up to criticize her actions. George Hendricks pointed out that Brenda had been harassing homeowners for months over petty issues while ignoring real problems like broken streetlights and unkempt common areas. Sarah Chen questioned why the HOA was spending money on lawyers to defend Brenda's personal vendetta instead of on community improvements. Marcus Webb, one of the other board members, actually resigned during the meeting. He stood up and said, "I can't be part of this anymore. Brenda, what you did was wrong, and I'm not going to help you defend it. I quit. He walked out of the meeting to scattered applause. Peggy Thornton, the other board member, looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. When someone asked her if she had approved Brenda's action, she shook her head. I didn't know she was going to do that. She told me and Marcus that she was just going to send another violation notice. So you acted without board approval? Someone called out. Brenda's face was red. I have the authority as president to take emergency action when necessary. Pouring concrete over a garden bed is an emergency, George shouted. What emergency? The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. The motion for a special assessment failed, with only Brenda voting for it. Someone made a motion to remove Brenda as president, and it passed overwhelmingly. Brenda refused to accept the vote, claiming it was invalid. But Peggy told her that according to the bylaws, a majority vote of homeowners present at a meeting could remove any board member for cause. Brenda stormed out of the meeting. The next morning, I got a call from Peggy. Trevor, I wanted to let you know that the board is taking this seriously now. Well, it's just me now since Marcus resigned and Brenda was removed. I'm scheduling an election for a new board as soon as possible. In the meantime, I want to try to settle this lawsuit. What would it take? Peggy, I appreciate the call, but Brenda destroyed my property, I said. She didn't just violate some HOA rule, she committed a crime. I'm not dropping this. I understand, Peggy said, but the lawsuit is against the HOA, not just Brenda personally. Every homeowner in this community will suffer if the HOA has to pay a big judgment. Can we at least talk about a settlement? I told her I would discuss it with Diana. When I did, Diana pointed out that Peggy had a point. If the HOA was bankrupted by the judgment, it could affect everyone's property values, including mine. But she also noted that we needed to send a message that this kind of behavior was unacceptable. Here's what I suggest, Diana said. We agree to settle with the HOA for the actual damages, around $38,000, plus your attorney's fees. But we pursue a separate personal lawsuit against Brenda for the punitive damages and for intentional infliction of emotional distress. She acted outside her authority and caused this damage. She should be personally liable. That approach made sense to me. We reached out to Peggy with the proposal, and she agreed immediately. The HOA would pay for the restoration of my garden and cover my legal fees. In exchange, I would release the HOA from further claims, but Brenda would face a personal lawsuit. When Brenda found out about the settlement, she tried to argue that the HOA should defend her since she had been acting in her capacity as president. The new attorney the HOA hired, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres, shut that down immediately. Ms. Whitmore, you acted without board approval and while a court injunction was pending. The HOA is not going to indemnify you for actions that were clearly outside your authority. The personal lawsuit against Brenda moved forward. Diana filed a complaint seeking $9,000 in punitive damages, claiming emotional distress, abuse of authority, and malicious destruction of property. We had all the evidence we needed, the security footage, her Facebook posts admitting to the destruction, and testimony from the concrete workers that she had lied to them about having my permission. Brenda hired her own attorney, a slick guy named Richard Bowman, who tried to argue that Brenda had genuinely believed she was acting within her authority. But the evidence was too clear. During a deposition, Brenda was forced to admit that she knew I had an attorney and that a court case was pending. She also admitted that she had not sought board approval before hiring the concrete company. Why didn't you wait for the court to decide the case? Diana asked during the deposition. Because I knew you would drag it out for months, Brenda said. The garden beds were an eyesore, and I wanted them gone. So you took matters into your own hands? I was enforcing the HOA covenants. Even though Mr. Raines had documentation showing he had approval for the beds, that approval was from years ago. Standards change. And you decided to change those standards yourself? Brenda hesitated. The board sets the standards, but the board didn't approve this action, did they? I have discretion as president to pour concrete over a homeowner's property without their permission. Brenda's attorney interrupted at that point, but the damage was done. Her own words showed that she had acted deliberately and with full knowledge that what she was doing was questionable at best. Meanwhile, I was working on restoring my garden. The HOA paid the $38,000 as agreed, and I immediately hired Carlos to start the restoration. The concrete removal took 3 days. Underneath, the damage was worse than I had hoped but not as catastrophic as I had feared. The soil was compressed and damaged, but not completely ruined. We brought in new soil amendments and spent a week reconditioning the beds. Rebuilding the raised beds took another week. Carlos did beautiful work, using high-quality cedar and adding some improvements I had been planning, like better drainage systems and built-in pest barriers. The irrigation system took 2 days to reinstall and test. The hardest part was replacing the plants. Many of my heirloom varieties had come from seeds I had traded with other gardeners or had been gifts from my late father, who had been an avid gardener himself. Some of them were irreplaceable, but I reached out to my network of gardening friends, and people were incredibly generous. One gardener in New Mexico sent me seeds from tomato plants that were descended from the same line as some of my destroyed plants. Another gardener in California shipped me pepper seedlings overnight. Within a month, the beds were planted again. Though it would take years to get back to where I had been, the community rallied around me too. Neighbors started bringing me plants and seeds. Someone anonymously left a gift card to a local nursery on my doorstep. The local gardening club invited me to speak at their next meeting, and when I did, several members gave me cuttings and divisions from their own gardens. It was touching and helped restore my faith in the community after Brenda had tried so hard to destroy it. The lawsuit against Brenda continued through the summer. Her attorney tried various tactics to get it dismissed, but Judge Drummond was having none of it. In August, we finally had our trial date. The trial lasted 2 days. Diana presented our case methodically, showing the security footage, entering the expert reports into evidence, and calling witnesses, including the concrete workers, who testified that Brenda had lied to them about having my permission. I testified about the emotional impact of seeing 6 years of work destroyed, the irreplaceable nature of some of the plants, and the damage to my relationship with the community. Brenda testified in her own defense, and it did not go well for her. She tried to portray herself as a dedicated volunteer who was just trying to maintain community standards, but she came across as rigid and vindictive. When Diana asked her if she felt any remorse for destroying my garden, Brenda said, "I regret that Mr. Raines chose to make this into a legal issue instead of just complying with the rules." "So you don't regret destroying his garden?" Diana pressed. "I regret that it was necessary," Brenda said. That answer seemed to affect the jury. I could see several of them react negatively. The closing arguments were powerful. Diana laid out how Brenda had abused her position, acted maliciously, and destroyed property that had taken years to build. She asked the jury to send a message that this kind of behavior was unacceptable. Brenda's attorney tried to argue that she had made a mistake in judgment, but that punitive damages were inappropriate. He claimed she was a volunteer trying to do her best and shouldn't be financially ruined for trying to enforce HOA rules. The jury deliberated for about 4 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict. They found in my favor on all counts. They awarded me the $9,000 in punitive damages that we had requested, plus additional damages of $3,000 for emotional distress. The total judgment against Brenda personally was $12,000, plus she would have to pay my attorney's fees, which came to another $5,000. Combined with the $38,000 the HOA had paid in the settlement, the total cost of Brenda's decision to pour concrete over my garden beds was $55,000. If you counted her own legal fees, which I heard were around $15,000, her moment of satisfaction at destroying my garden had cost her $70,000 personally, but the consequences went beyond just money. During the trial, several neighbors who had been harassed by Brenda had come forward with their own stories. After the verdict came in, 3 of them filed their own lawsuits against her for harassment and abuse of HOA authority. The new HOA board passed a resolution prohibiting her from serving in any HOA capacity for 10 years. Brenda tried to stay in the neighborhood for a few months after the trial, but the situation was untenable. People wouldn't speak to her. She got dirty looks at the grocery store. Someone spray-painted HOA Karren on her driveway one night, which was vandalism and wrong, but it showed how angry people were. By December, she had put her house on the market. She moved to Tucson in January 2026. As for the criminal charges, the county attorney's office did eventually file charges against Brenda for criminal damage and abuse of HOA authority. She pleaded no contest to a reduced charge of criminal damage, received a suspended sentence, and was ordered to pay restitution, which was satisfied by the civil judgment. She also had to do 100 hours of community service. She never served jail time, but she had a misdemeanor on her record. The HOA itself underwent significant changes. The new board, which included George Hendricks and Sarah Chen, completely rewrote the enforcement procedures to add checks and balances. No single board member could take action against a homeowner's property without a full board vote. They also added a mediation requirement before any violations could be enforced, and they established a homeowner appeal process with neutral arbitration. My garden was thriving again by spring of 2026. It wasn't quite back to where it had been before the concrete incident, but it was getting there. I had several new varieties of tomatoes that were even better adapted to the Arizona heat than my previous ones. The neighborhood gardening club had grown significantly, with several other residents starting their own food gardens after seeing what had happened to mine. There was even talk of establishing a community garden in one of the HOA's common areas. On a warm April evening, I was out in the garden harvesting tomatoes when George walked by with his dog. He stopped at the fence. "Looking good, Trevor. You've done an amazing job bringing it back." "Thanks, George. It's been a lot of work, but it's worth it. You know, what Brenda did to you was terrible, but in a weird way, it might have been the best thing for this community," George said. "People were scared to stand up to her. After you fought back and won, it showed everyone that HOA boards aren't untouchable. We've had more homeowner participation in the last 6 months than we had in the previous 5 years." He was right. The community was stronger now. The new board was responsive and reasonable. People attended meetings and participated in decisions. The fear and resentment that had built up under Brenda's reign had been replaced by a sense of actual community. A week later, I received a check in the mail from Brenda's attorney. It was the final payment on the judgment, the last installment of the $12,000 she owed me personally, plus the attorney's fees. I deposited it and used part of it to buy a new greenhouse setup that I had been wanting for years. It seemed fitting that Brenda's attempt to destroy my garden had actually funded its expansion. I never heard from Brenda again. According to neighborhood gossip, she had moved to a condo in Tucson that wasn't part of an HOA, which seemed ironic. Her house in Meadowbrook Heights sold in February to a young couple with 2 kids who loved the neighborhood and were relieved to find out that the previous HOA president was gone. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a surreal experience quit. I continued to share my garden harvest with neighbors and the food bank. The local newspaper did a follow-up story about the case, which brought some attention to issues with HOA overreach in Arizona. There was even some discussion in the state legislature about strengthening protections for homeowners against HOA abuse, though I wasn't holding my breath for any actual reform. In May 2026, exactly 1 year after the concrete incident, the neighborhood held a garden party in my honor. It was George's idea, supported by the new HOA board. They set up tables in my yard, and neighbors brought food and drinks. Someone made a cake decorated with little fondant vegetables. There were speeches thanking me for standing up to Brenda and for helping to change the community for the better. Sarah Chen gave a particularly moving speech about how her son had been inspired by the whole situation to study law. "He told me that he wants to be the kind of lawyer who helps ordinary people stand up to bullies," she said. "Trevor, you showed us all that you don't have to just accept it when someone abuses their authority. You fought back, and you won, and you made our whole neighborhood better." I was touched and a little embarrassed by all the attention. When they asked me to say a few words, I kept it simple. "I just wanted to grow some tomatoes," I said, which got a laugh. But seriously, what happened taught me something important. Communities are only as good as the people who participate in them. If you see something wrong, speak up. If someone abuses their power, hold them accountable. And if an HOA president tries to pour concrete over your garden beds, take lots of pictures and hire a good lawyer. That got another laugh and a round of applause. Diana was there too, having become something of a friend over the course of the case. She raised her glass and said, "And for God's sake, if you're going to commit property destruction, don't post about it on Facebook." The party went late into the evening. At one point, I stood back and watched my neighbors laughing and talking in my yard, eating fresh salsa made from my tomatoes and enjoying the garden that had caused so much trouble. The raised beds looked beautiful in the fading light, full of healthy plants heavy with fruit and vegetables. It had cost $55,000 in a year of my life to defend them, but looking around at the community that had come together, it felt worth it. The concrete was gone, my garden was restored, and Brenda Whitmore was nothing but an unpleasant memory. The HOA was functioning properly again, serving the community instead of tyrannizing it. And I had learned that sometimes when someone tries to bury your dreams under concrete, the best revenge is to break through and grow something even better. As the party wound down and the last neighbors headed home, I walked through the garden one more time, checking on the plants and enjoying the peace of the evening. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Great party. BTW, heard from a lawyer friend in Tucson. Brenda is trying to join her condo board there. Some people never learn." I laughed and put my phone away. That was Brenda's problem now, not mine. I had tomatoes to harvest, peppers to water, and a garden to tend. After everything that had happened, that felt like victory enough. The summer of 2026 was productive beyond my expectations. The garden yielded an abundance that exceeded even my best years before the concrete incident. I attributed it partly to the improved bed construction that Carlos had built, and partly to the fresh enthusiasm I had for the project after nearly losing it. I donated over 200 pounds of produce to the local food bank between June and September, and I still had more than enough for myself and to share with neighbors. In August, I was contacted by a regional gardening magazine that wanted to do a feature story about my experience. The article, titled "When HOAs Go Too Far, One Gardener's Fight to Grow Food," appeared in their October issue. It generated significant interest and led to me being invited to speak at several gardening clubs and homeowner association reform groups throughout Arizona. The speaking engagements were unexpected but rewarding. At each event, I met homeowners who had their own horror stories about HOA overreach. Some had been fined thousands of dollars for minor violations. Others had been foreclosed on because they couldn't afford the mounting fines and legal fees. Many felt powerless against their HOA boards and didn't know they had legal options. I always made sure to emphasize that I had been lucky in several ways. I had documentation, security footage, and a clear case of property destruction. I had been able to afford a good lawyer, and I had a supportive community. Not everyone had those advantages. But I also stressed that homeowners had rights, that HOA boards weren't above the law, and that standing up to abuse was possible. The attention from the magazine article also led to some unexpected professional opportunities. A software company that specialized in HOA management systems reached out to ask if I would consult on developing better dispute resolution features for their platform. They wanted to build in safeguards that would prevent situations like mine from escalating. I agreed, seeing it as a way to help other homeowners avoid what I had gone through. By the fall of 2026, life had truly returned to normal. The garden was thriving, the community was healthy, and the drama of the concrete incident had faded into local legend. New residents moving into the neighborhood would hear the story and often come by to see the famous garden beds. I didn't mind. It was a good reminder that ordinary people could stand up to bullies and win. In October, I received a letter forwarded from my attorney. It was from Brenda. My first instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was brief and formal. She wrote that she had undergone therapy and realized that she had been dealing with her divorce and life changes in unhealthy ways, taking out her anger and need for control on the neighborhood. She said she understood why I had sued her and didn't blame me. She didn't explicitly apologize for destroying my garden, but she wrote that she hoped I had been able to restore it and that she wished me well. I read the letter twice, trying to decide how I felt about it. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that she had been wrong. I thought about responding but ultimately decided against it. The chapter was closed. She was dealing with her issues, and I had moved on with my life. There was nothing productive that could come from reopening that dialogue. Instead, I filed the letter away in the folder with all the other documents from the case and went out to the garden. The evening was cooling down, and the plants needed watering. As I moved through the beds, checking leaves and picking ripe vegetables, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This garden, this small plot of land, had been worth fighting for. Not just because of the vegetables it produced, but because it represented something important. The right to use your own property as you saw fit, the importance of standing up to abuse of power, and the value of community. The raised beds that Brenda had tried to destroy with concrete were now more productive than ever. The tomatoes she had buried were replaced with new varieties that were even better adapted to our climate. The soil she had tried to entomb was richer and more alive than before. In trying to end my garden, she had inadvertently made it stronger. As I finished the watering and headed back inside, I thought about the journey from that terrible afternoon when I first saw the concrete to this peaceful evening a year and a half later. It had been stressful, expensive, and emotionally draining. But it had also brought out the best in my community, connected me with wonderful people, and taught me lessons about resilience and justice that I would carry for the rest of my life. The final accounting was clear. Brenda's decision to pour concrete over my garden beds had cost her personally $47,000 when you combined the civil judgment, attorney's fees, and her contribution to the HOA settlement. It had cost her reputation, her position in the community, and ultimately her home. The HOA had paid another $38,000 to restore the garden, and untold thousands more in legal fees and management changes. All of that because one woman couldn't accept that her authority had limits, that other people had rights, and that you can't solve disputes by pouring concrete over them. My garden had been valued at roughly $38,000, but its real value was incalculable. It was therapy, hobby, food source, and connection to my late father all in one. It was also now a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny and proof that homeowners don't have to be victims of HOA abuse. As I looked out the window at the garden in the fading twilight, the plants casting long shadows in the evening light, I smiled. Brenda Whitmore had tried to bury my garden under concrete, and instead, she had ended up buried under a $47,000 judgment. Sometimes justice really does prevail, even if it takes time, effort, and a good lawyer to make it happen. The garden grows on, season after season, producing food and beauty and serving as a reminder that even when someone tries to destroy what you've built, if you stand firm and fight back, you can break through the concrete and flourish once again.